everybody. Welcome to Inside the Magic Circle. I am Jason Augustus Newcomb, and today I am talking to a very interesting and creative magician, someone who when I've read his work, I found it very exciting and very interesting. He's different. He's not, super into the ceremonial, traditional grimoire kind of movement. He's not really into the Golden Dawn movement, although maybe influenced by it a little bit. We're going to find out more about it. But he's an innovator and he's an interesting magician, and I can't wait to talk to him. He's also had some sort of controversy in the last few years, so maybe he'll get into that with us a little bit today too. So anyway, the person I'm talking about is Taylor Ellwood. Welcome to the show, Taylor. I'm glad you're here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show. Glad to be here.
Was that an okay introduction, or was that...
Hey, it works for me, you know. I'm not too...
Is there anything like really essentially biographical that you want to add to that before I get into the questions?
I would say, I've been practicing magic since I was 16, so over 20, almost 28 years now. And, I've got a wide variety of experience. I actually did start out with neo-shamanism and elemental hermeticism, and then I went from there into to some ceremonial magic, like through William G. Gray's works and some Golden Dawn stuff. And then
okay, well, this is a good jumping off place. Like, how old were you when you first became interested in magic?
I think I was always interested in magic as a kid. I remember reading...
16 was about the time?
When I found out that magic was real, yeah. But like when I was a kid, I was always reading fantasy books,
Sure.
And so I always wanted magic to be real. And then, I was 16 years old and I had this kid in high school that I knew who decided to sit me down one day and tell me this wild story about how he had astral projected and encountered demons. He was doing it to see if he could freak me out. And so the last thing he expected was for me to calmly look at him and say, "Tell me more." And where can I read books about this? Because it was like, oh my gosh, this is real. And so the next day brought some books in. That was the last, he didn't expect that response at all. So
it's fascinating because you are not the only person who's had that sort of, it seems like it's either some older person that people encounter or some friend in school who just is kind of doing it, goofily, and then you actually end up following it much further along. So what was the first book that you read about magic?
He gave me a couple pamphlets. I don't remember what those pamphlets were. They were like maybe 15, 16 pages long. And, it was like about astral projection and stuff like that. But then the first book that I read, actual book that I read was How to Work with Spirit Guides and Entities by Ted Andrews. That's the approximate title. I still have the book to this day, and I still have the other books that I got by him. And that was kind of my jumping off point into magic. And so with Ted Andrews, you kind of have like this combination of ceremonial hermetic work and neo-shamanic techniques. So
right. He's most famous for his book Animal Speak, but he's actually got a ton of stuff that has very sort of Golden Dawn oriented Kabbalistic ceremonial magic stuff in it, although he does sort of pare it down and is more visionary. One of the things that I think is really interesting about you is that you seem to be very visionary in the way that you approach work. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of sort of visualization and energy work that has to do with sort of moving your consciousness in different directions. More and more we're seeing magic shift towards this sort of like recipe book where you have to follow a book's exact sort of the words that are written in the book and the right ingredients at the right time, which is that's always been around in a component of things, but it seems like it's really been strongly taken over. So what drew you down that sort of more energy imagistic kind of approach to magic?
Well, I think, first, of course, it was reading Ted Andrews' books because he kind of emphasized more of an experiential model and paying attention. And then, I add into that some interest of my own in energy work. Like I first started learning about energy work when I read Barbara Ann Brennan's books, Hands of Light, and then also just my pursuit of Taoist and Dzogchen meditation techniques and practices, which I do to this day, which really emphasize more of an experiential approach to the body. Not even, some of it's visual, but a lot of it's just more tactile and sensory based. And so for me, that's always been something that's been fascinating to me and of interest. And I do see that kind of that trend toward more of the recipe book thing, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing.
Well,
You know,
I
for the
don't really
occult
want to.
community.
I don't want to value judge it. I mean, you can if you want. You're free to. You're free to
I'm going
take
to
it to
value judge it. And so, you know, I'm just going to say I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. I mean, I think there's some value in it, but there's also, you know, at a certain point, you also have to look at like, well, how does this really work? Not just here's a recipe and go do it, but here, you know, how does this really work? And that's really kind of the focus of my work in general, is more of a, not just experiential, but really kind of an analytical perspective on how and why magic works, and how to take things apart and put them back together again.
And
And
this is actually the main subject I want to talk about with you, because I think this is what I want to talk about with everybody, is how they perceive magic as being, and what, you know, what their perspective is on it. But just real quick before we get into that, at what point in your life did you realize that magic was going to be, you know, you were a kid and you were reading books and you were into it and stuff, but when did you realize magic was going to be the sort of center of your life in a lot of ways?
I mean, when I read that first book,
The first time,
because
the
that
first moment.
was, yeah, because like for me, I always had a lot of questions. And before I got into magic, I was a born again Christian for like about a year or so. And the one thing I found really dissatisfying about that was that all the answers were supposed to be in one book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a book that had been, for all intents and purposes, written 2,000 years ago.
Sure.
You know, the latest book of it. You know, at least the official book. I'm sure there's, you know, I know there's other stuff out there, but still, for all intents and purposes, you were supposed to have all your answers, and that didn't work for me. And so when I found out about magic, something I'd wanted to always be real, and I started to read it, it was kind of like, okay, here's this opportunity to ask all my questions and get my answers, and I'm the one finding the answers. I'm not relying upon some book. I'm not relying upon some, you know, sky daddy telling me what is or isn't going to work. I'm finding out for myself.
That's
And
interesting. It's interesting that you put it that way, because I think that in a lot of ways, the approach to magic that you take, you're talking about, you can find your own answers through exploration. That is actually the opposite of the way a lot of people approach things. They approach it very much from a studious perspective, and a lot of people have trouble actually feeling courageous enough to do magical ritual themselves, because they want to make sure everything's right. So how would you advise a person who was having that sort of attitude, that they can just sort of enter the magic circle and get started?
well, I mean, here's the truth of it. You're never going to get it exactly right all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do stuff, and you're also going to do magical workings, and you're going to be like, you know, I could have, if I changed this, it would be better. Or if I did that, it would be different. And that's really the approach that I always take. I mean, when I first started out, like I didn't start experimenting like right out the cradle, so to speak, you know, like when I started practicing, I read the books and I did the practices. And for like the first year or so, I really just focused on learning the practices. And I do think that's important. Like when you first start out, you need to build a foundation. But the thing is you actually have to do the work. And when you're doing that work, you're going to make mistakes. You're also going to have experiences that are going to test what you know. Like you're going to read a book and you're going to do the stuff in the book and you're going to be like, well, wait a minute, they said this was supposed to happen and it didn't happen, or it changed in this way. And that's where you have to get curious and start examining things. And it's where you're going to start personalizing magic, because you're going to be like, well, if I change this, or I took this out, or whatever else, then this could happen. I know a lot of people are like, well, if I change something, you know, things could go wrong. Well, I mean, that's life. You know, you take a risk anytime but if you really want to learn something and you want to make it your own, you have to be willing to examine not just like what's come before you, but your own experience of it, and then be willing to test things out and try stuff out and see what happens. And yeah, I mean, you may have some boo-boos along the way. You might make some mistakes. You might have some bad experiences. I certainly have had those. I'm sure you have too.
Oh yeah.
But you know, I mean, that's part of learning, and that's part of life. And
I think the two biggest
what
fears
it is.
people have two big fears about approaching things from a practical perspective, and those fears are that they're going to go through the motions and do this stuff, and it's just not going to work. And the other fear is that they're going to go through the motions and it's going to work too well and it's going to overwhelm them in some way. And so what would you say? I mean, for me, the obvious thing, if you do what you were suggesting, which is to do some sort of preparatory practices, then that first question kind of becomes moot, right? Because you're already having some sort of experiences, or you're going to stop doing it. You're already feeling energy moving. You're already, so I mean, if you're doing preparatory things, you're going to get there. But what about the fear that it's going to be too much? Like, how would you address that with a new student?
I mean, sometimes you are going to do stuff and it may be too much, and you just kind of have to deal with that experience. And I mean, I say this as somebody who has done some wildly successful magical workings and sometimes has had things work out a little too well. But I mean, that's again part of that learning process. I mean, there's no way to avoid that stuff. So you just have to be brave and be willing to do the work and accept the responsibility. And sometimes you're going to have some experiences. I mean, the best way I can put it this way is I have this practice. It's called the elemental balancing ritual. And I do this every year or so. I switch from one element to another. And I don't work just with the classic 5 elements. I work with other ones as well. But, doing this work has been very transformative of my life. But I'm going to tell you that some of those transformations have been painful. Sometimes I've discovered things about myself that I haven't liked. Sometimes I've had a negative impact on the people in my life. Has it stopped me from doing it? No. It's something that ultimately speaks to me. It has been overall more beneficial to do it. I just accept that is kind of the consequences that come with it. And some people would say, well, that's really extreme. Like, why would you be willing to do that even knowing what you know? And it's like, because I know that ultimately in the end, this is my journey, and I have to be willing to live my life and live that journey, knowing that I chose to pursue the path that I did, and also knowing that you can't anticipate everything. I mean, people have this notion of trying to control everything with magic. I think that this is really important to note too. Like, they want to be in control. Like, okay, I'm doing and this is where I think the recipe books are so problematic. If I do things just right, then I get this result and everything works the way that it's supposed to, and I'm in control. But control's an illusion. Once you go and you do a magical working to call something into your life or what have you, you don't have control of the situation anymore. Not completely. Things are going to come your way. You're not going to always be able to anticipate everything, and you're going to have to deal with what comes up. And
So
if you can accept that, then you're ready to really practice magic. But if you can't, then my advice is don't practice. Run the other way, because you're not going to always be in control, and that's just a simple fact of life.
one of the things that I'm hearing from people who are, I don't want to call them recipe book magicians, because I think that's a little bit demeaning and not necessarily even accurate either. But I'm not that I'm telling you that you're wrong to use the word for the people specifically that you're thinking of, but the people who I've been talking to, I wouldn't want to say this, but the more traditional people who are traditionalist focused people who want to work with grimoires and to sort of get the meat off of the bones from those old books. A lot of what they actually focus upon is the intelligences that they're attempting to contact and to create relationships with, the beings that are involved in those books. And that is a place where definitely you're not ever going to have an exact recipe relationship, because a being has its own sort of will as well. So I mean, I think that's where what you're saying kind of meets with where they are, because they're talking about creating relationships. And so if you can talk to a demon and say, hey, I'd like this to happen, and the demon can just say no, or the demon can say yes, but not be being sincere. So in your perspective, from the way that you like to work magic, where do you see what are beings to you? What are angels and demons to you, and how do they figure into your own work?
Well, like, I think that they are independent beings that have a symbiotic relationship with us. Like, I've worked with elemental spirits, I've worked with nature spirits, I've worked with angels and archangels, and I've worked with demons. And, my approach is very much based on a respect model. Like, when I do work with them, I'm kind of like, all right, I'm going to approach you with respect. If you don't want further contact with me, just let me know, and I'll just let it go at that. Like, for example, I once tried to contact and connect with the Goetic spirit Visago, and he was having none of it. He was like, no, not interested. Okay, fair enough. I wasn't going to try and push it. But
He's a very popular spirit.
right, he is. But then I've worked with other spirits where they were like, yeah, let's go ahead and work together. And so I mean, you do that, and you just kind of you create the right relationship with them.
So you mentioned elemental entities, and you also mentioned that you work with more than just the four elements. Now, the thing about the four elements is that, as well, we can um, figure out ways of kind of mapping them to our current reality model. The model from which they come is not something that we actually believe in anymore. We don't believe the world is made out of water, fire, air, and earth. We know that it's made out of other sorts of chemical and energetic things that don't have anything to do with those four elements. You also mentioned in this book, which is the first place that I became aware of you, things like working with your cells and working with different sort of proteins and microorganisms within
Neurotransmitters. Yeah.
neurotransmitters. Yeah. So I mean, would you consider those to also be beings or also be spirits, or was that something separate?
No, I mean, I think that they're beings in their own right. I mean, if you really look at the reality of the human body, we have this illusion of the singular I, but the majority of your body is actually composed of life. That's not
Yes, and
you, your
I mean
microbes and things like that, and that's what you're working with.
that's also true of the personality. I mean, we're you're a different you talking to me now than if you're down at the store and someone's being mean to you, and you start getting shy, or if you start feeling really good about yourself and you start being those are all different people that aren't really the same one, even though we function as an I. All of our physical as well as our psychological parts are totally different things. But you see beings, including sort of I guess what I'm getting at is if you're talking about elemental beings, but we kind of know their not essence as far as we understand things now. What are they to you at that point, since they are sort of human creations in terms of how we've categorized them?
Well, I think of elementals as essentially being forces that move us, in a way that there's something that they're primal. And so, I mean, you look at like the element of fire, which is really kind of like light and fire and all this stuff. And there is a primal force to it. Same for water. But then like let's look at gravity, for example, or let's look at darkness, or for that matter, let's look at an emotion like love or emptiness or something like that, which is really much more than just an emotion. It's an experience that moves us. And so when I talk about this notion of elemental work, that's one of the things that I really focus on. I find it curious in a way that even though we know that the four elements, or really five elements if you want to count spirit,
Sure.
that really there's more to it than just that nonetheless we still have this, in magical circles, we still have this very, for the most part, very antiquated approach to working with elemental magic, where we're still doing the five elemental stuff. I'm going to be writing a book that's going to hopefully come out in 2021 on the topic and kind of my own approach. I mean, I have written about it in the book that
you're more elements, you mean, than just four or five.
Yeah, kind of exploring that and why that is, and taking apart the basic concept and then building in some other stuff. But I think it's really important that we recognize, I mean, whatever your approach to elemental magic is, or anything else for that matter, that you question like what is put out there and challenge it to discover for yourself what you could learn. And for me, that came about when I had come up with this elemental balancing ritual, and I ended up ultimately, like a couple years in, I'm like, I need to work with like my ability to communicate. And I decided to work with the element of sound. Well, there was no elemental model of sound, but why not? I mean, sound is something that we experience every day. We're experiencing it right now as I'm talking.
So what is your mode? When a lot of magicians are trying to figure out what they should be doing, they either consult with another human person, or they consult with a new book, or they consult with an old book, or they enjoy the scholarship. Like what drives your work forward? Because it doesn't sound like it's really driven by quite any of those things. Is it just do you get inspired, or what makes you move the way that you move?
It's driven by asking questions and wanting to understand the world and the universe, but also myself, and wanting to, but at the same time wanting to advance things. Like I in a way, I'm a bit of a futurist. I look toward the future and I ask myself, for example, where things are going to be, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And it's the same way that I approach magic. I'm always looking at it from the perspective of where are things going to be down the line, but also like, what questions do I have? For example, a lot of the work I'm doing right now, I'm learning Qigong, and I'm also doing a working called The Sphere of Art that was written about by Robert Stewart. I've taken it and modified it some beyond what he shared in his books with his blessing. I mean, I've been kind of keeping him up to date. Well, now, the next frame of that is going to be connecting the Qigong with the Sphere of Art work, which is working with the archangels and planetary
Okay.
and elemental energies and all that stuff, and really taking these, because what I'm finding is I'm seeing a really interesting parallel between the Qigong work in terms of how you're working with the key, both, the key of the heaven and the underworld, but also how you mediate those forces within yourself, and how you do the same thing with the Sphere of Art. So, I'm always looking at things and I'm asking myself, how can I make connections? And I even had, like, the other day, an interesting connection between, I was reading about architectural design, and I was also reading some books on elemental magic, because I'm I'm in research mode right now. And I might add, I do read a ton of books. Like, I'm always researching stuff, but and I found this interesting connection between architectural design and elemental magic. In terms of how you
But
design for space and
the
life.
the distinction between the way that you seem to be approaching research and the way that I see a lot of sort of historical magical scholar focused people is that they're looking for some sort of truth or essence by looking backwards, where it seems like you're not focused in that way at all. You're not looking for what the correct spell, the original spell was. You're more saying, how can we utilize these ideas and push them forward into the future? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much the case. I'm looking at it from the perspective of, I mean, hey, great, I respect the past, and I have no problem acknowledging it and citing it. I mean, you read most of my books are basically a little bit academic in terms of the internal sites and all that other stuff. But I am looking at it from a perspective of, how can we drive this forward? Where can we go next? Because I think, there's a necessity for magic to evolve, not just to stay where it was, not just to do what people did in the past. And should we respect the past? Should we learn from it? Yes. Should we let it define our magic? No.
Do you feel like your discoveries and innovations are guided by intelligences beyond, such as the beings that we were referring to earlier on, or do you feel like you take credit for them?
I think it's a combination. I mean, certainly some of it is kind of based on my own inspiration and questions, but then on the other hand, I've, like, particularly like with my work with the archangels, I've definitely had some guidance. Like, one of my recent books, The Magic of Design, I was basically told by the archangel Camiel, I want you to write this book, and he kind of gave me the basic idea framework of it, and then go ahead and be creative. And I did, and I ended up writing it, and it was it was a needed book. So I mean, I kind of think that, like with my stuff, it's a combination. I mean, I've always worked closely with spirits. I've always had that relationship. So that it's kind of like where does one thing begin and where does one thing end? I mean, they're kind of, in terms of the way that I've always approached my work, it's always been a combination of creative inspiration, but also connection with the spirits and paying attention and listening to where
So,
things could go.
but you make a distinction between creative inspiration and connection with the spirits, because to me, I feel like those might actually be sort of similar things. That that the creative inspiration may be coming from the very place.
That could be, but then I think also, like, sometimes when I'm coming up with questions that I'm asking, or things like that, I don't know, like for me, as an example, I started reading up on architectural design a couple years ago,
Right.
and
I sort of interrupted you
and
there.
that didn't really come from, like, a spirit saying, hey, Taylor, you got to read about this. It was more like, it would be really interesting to understand my relationship with space in a different way. So I started reading up on that, and it ended up shaping my ritual space. I started using, for example, like my ceiling as part of the ritual space. Most people don't think of using a ceiling as part of the ritual
Hmm.
space. Like normally we're very kind of like this, but I was looking at it from, all the different things and like putting, paintings up on the ceiling and on the baseboards and things like that in order to create this very specific space. And it was because I was curious about what that would look like. And so, I mean, do I think that there's some truth to the fact that, there can be divine inspiration from the spirits? Sure. But I also think sometimes, you can just be inspired because you got curious about a topic and you're like, how does this come together with this?
So you actually intuited where I was about to go with your last couple of sentences just before. Your personal ritual space. What does that entail at this point in your life, and how has it changed over the years?
I would say that it's essentially my bedroom.
Hmm.
It is, it's a space where it's got a really wonderful windows, which I like on the one side, and then the rest of its walls. And I've got paintings and I've got bookshelves with magical books, of course. And then I've got my altar, in a couple altars. I've got an altar to elephant, and then which is the animal that I work with and resonate with. And then I've got like an altar with my sphere of art stuff and some other things. And in terms of over the years, I mean, my bedroom has always kind of been my ritual space because it's a very intimate space, and I think that it's good to have that kind of thing. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to be in a situation where you have tons of extra rooms in your house and you can set up a separate ritual space, hey, go you. But I don't think most of us are that way, so you kind of make do with what you got. And in my case, I've always preferred to have the sanctity of the bedroom be that ritual space.
So within your bedroom, do you work within a circular space? It sounds like you've got multiple altars. So are you working at an altar, or how does your sort of ritual action work in your workings most of the time?
Well, like when I'm doing magical work, I will start out with creating like like my sphere of art, because that's kind of the thing that I'm working with, calling in the archangels and stuff like that. That's kind of what I've been doing the last few years anyway. And so
For those unfamiliar with this, what is the name of the author's book that you're referring to?
The name is actually The Sphere of Art, and
The
it's by
Sphere of Art.
R.J. Stewart or Robert Stewart.
Okay,
So
yeah.
yeah.
And so that working has been a big inspiration to you in the way that you conduct yourself on a fairly regular basis then.
Yeah, I do it every day.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's daily magical work, and it's been a fairly involved process. I mean, I've been working with alchemical materials and then other things. And then of course my own modifications of it as well. But anyway, that's its own story. So I do that, and then I mean, my altars are nearby, and I'll work with the substances or whatever if needed. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I do, and at the same time, after that, I'll usually do some meditation. I'll do some qigong. It's kind of where it's at right now. If I'm doing something a little bit more formal, like I'm working with a spirit, I might. It depends on what I'm doing. Like the other day, I created a new painting for a nature spirit that I'm working with as an offering. And so, for me, it was, I did my sphere of art, and then I sat down and pulled out the paints and started painting and just kind of let her guide my hand as I worked, to create the painting in honor of her. So, I mean, it just depends on what you're doing.
So the sphere of art is largely a visualization process, and but so how much of your magical practice would you say is more on the inner spaces rather than in the outer spaces? It sounds like you also have some altars that you're doing stuff with as well.
So I would say more of it's on the internal space. And I would say it's not really so much a visual as it's more of an experiential. Like I've memorized the chants. I'm paying attention to the feelings and things like that. I'm not always necessarily like visualizing the angels. It's more like I'm tuning into the experience of the angel. And some of that might be visual or auditory, but it might also be tactile or even like smell or taste oriented, depending on what happens. So it's sensorial. I just make that distinction because I think a lot of times when people think visualization, they only think, a visual image, and
Sure.
there can be more to it than that.
I appreciate you involving all the senses, because I do mean that, you know, that all of that in the visualization process. But go ahead, you were going to say something.
But I was going to say, like, I mean, so my altars, you know, I work with them occasionally. Like, they're there, and I will do some work with them on occasion. But it's more like, you know, the work is happening more internal, and it really depends. I mean, if I'm doing practical magic for something, that's going to probably be a little bit more involved in external.
Hmm.
You know, I find these days that my need to do external magic, you know, practical magic to get things, has diminished quite a bit, because I basically am living the life I want to live. I'm doing what I want to do. You know, I'm fully self-employed. I'm writing my books, creating classes, and all that other fun stuff. And that's kind of where I'm at for the moment. And you know, I don't see that changing anytime soon. But you know, sometimes I'll do some practical magic still for certain things. But for the most part, you know, life's going the way I want it to go. So I just trust that, and kind of focus on the internal work.
And are there any tools involved? You know, wands or swords or you know, candles? Or wearing robes? Does that figure into your work at all, or no?
Not really. I mean, I back in my early days, I definitely did have all that stuff. But I mean, I have like a cord that I wear when I'm doing the sphere of art. I have some alchemical substances in glass bottles that I'll work with.
When you say
Um,
work with, does that mean you'll eat them or drink them?
No,
Just
just that I'm working with the substances. Like, you know, I have them in bottle. I wouldn't recommend drinking or eating them. That's probably not a recipe, especially like the mercury, for example, or something like that. Not such a good idea. But no, like, I'm just working with those substances, mediating them, working the energies through them, you know. So
mm,
like, I might do a meditation where I'm holding like a glass bottle with the liquid and the dry substances, and, you know, kind of just mediating, connecting with those substances, as an example. But you know, it's not you know, that's about the extent of it. I don't like have you know, the full, like the sword, the stuff like that. I mean, I still have some of my old magical tools. Like, I have a
what
staff from like when I was like 18 still, you know, to this day, and I'm looking at it right now, and it kind of brings a smile to my mind, and I'll go hiking with it and stuff like that. But I mean, for the most part, like, you know, most of this, you know, I find the need for tools kind of diminishes as you learn the stuff, and as you make it part of yourself. And in fact, there's a really good exercise in William G. Gray's Magical Ritual Methods, which talks about doing exactly that. And I recommend it to anyone
doing what?
reading it out there.
Doing
Learning how to take a tool that you're working with and internalize it and make it part
mm,
of yourself, so that
sure.
you're embodying it.
It's interesting, because that's definitely been a part of my work, but it does feel like the zeitgeist of occulture is heading in a different direction entirely. And in fact, the thing that I'm hearing from a lot of folks is that they're actually going the opposite direction. The longer they've been doing magic, the more they need specific tools and stuff that they might not have needed when they were doing more, you know, Golden Dawn oriented types of magic. But it's interesting, because you seem to have been more influenced by um, the William G. Gray school, of which, you know, R.J. Stewart is connected with that a bit himself, and so it's so like you're kind of on a slightly different, even without the fact that you're an innovator, you've already kind of started from a slightly different perspective than a lot of folks have. Um, how much of your work, where you're doing, say, the angelic work, do you feel like you're um, seeing things that are outside of the physical realm, or hearing things or feeling things outside of the physical realm, that then move yourself forward in a new way in life? In other words, how much does the in the temple, the inner temple or outer temple, how much does that impact your research and so forth moving forward, or is it more just an experiential, you know, essence that's happening there? Do
Well,
you get what I'm saying?
there's definitely an experiential essence, but I mean, I would say that it's certainly playing out in my life in terms of just the work that I'm doing and the direction I'm taking things. You know, both my spiritual practice, but also in the living of my life. I mean, a large part of it has really been about, in a very real sense, shifting away from more of an ego based practice. I mean, I would say, you know, if you'd met me a few years ago, you would have seen much more of an ego based practice in a lot of ways, toward more of a service based practice, both
Hmm.
and work, both in terms of, you know, service to the community that feels drawn to my work, but also toward just the overall like focus of where I want to take that work and just the living of my life. And I think it's really been good for me overall. I definitely would say, looking back on who I was even like a few years ago, I'm happier not being that person anymore than than when I was that person. And I mean, I think that that's really how life ultimately should work. Like, your spiritual work is something that you should live, and it should be something that works through you. And so for me, that's really what it is. I'm doing this work and it's something that I live, and it works through me, and it's a huge part of my life. And
so you a few years ago, you had some sort of troubling things happen between you and some other people in the magical community. I don't really know that much about it. We talked one other time, and you mentioned it, but we didn't get into it at that time. So tell me what happened and what the repercussions of it have been.
Oh, well, I mean, it wasn't like hugely troubling. I mean, I would say, put it this way, like I took a public stance that I thought that, in regards to the occult convention scene, that it felt like there were certain people who were always getting comp to travel, they might be getting paid, and everyone else who was a presenter and an author was basically getting ignored. And this was being, and I also called out the fact that convention organizers weren't being transparent about, their process for selecting guests of honor and things like that. And part of it came from the frustration that, I'm not, I've never been a Llewellyn author or a Weiser author. I was with a small press at the time. And it's like, how, what does it take to get somebody who's with a smaller press, to get some attention and awareness around these things and be a guest of honor. And not that I haven't been the occasional guest of honor at events, I have, but like for the most part, unless you're a Llewellyn or a Weiser author or a New Page author, you typically don't get a lot of press or awareness. I mean, you really have to put yourself out there.
I mean,
so,
I was a Weiser author, and I can tell you that I was still stuck in the smaller rooms most of the time myself. So
right. Well, and I'm not saying it's true for every author, but I mean, there's just certain authors that are big names where they kind of just automatically, and I didn't think that was right. And I thought, I mean, here's this practice going on, and so I called it out in a few public letters that I wrote. And I mean, the end result of it for me was that I basically got blacklisted for all intents and purposes from conventions, and I stopped going because, because it was kind of like, okay, you're telling us how we should do our thing, and we don't, basically the convention organizers were kind of ticked off about that.
Well, I mean, to be fair to them, though, I mean, you're able to start your own convention and run it the way you want if you like to, and that's the way they, it's a private organization doing their own thing, right? It's not like it's a public service to the some community. They're doing it largely, I don't know if it's for profit, but they're doing it for their whatever their inner selves purpose that brings them happiness from it. They're doing it for that reason, and we are benefiting from it, whether we're in the small room or the large room, right? I mean, we're still getting the opportunity to speak.
There's a symbiotic relationship there, though. Like if I'm gonna come to your event and present, you're in part using my name as one of the draws. And don't get me wrong, I realize some big names, they're gonna get more of a draw. And also there is the problematic framework around how you frame a convention. If you're saying that if you want to say that a convention's for profit, then just say that. But if you're saying, well, this is in part to serve the community, well, okay, if you're saying that, then you have to, your actions have to match that, I think. And I mean, sometimes
it depends on what you mean by servicing the community, though, really, if you think about it. I mean, the community, more people want to, what's the name of a really big author? I'm blanking. More people want to, we'll go in the past. More people want to see Starhawk than want to see Jason Augustus Newcomb. It's just a fact.
And that's a fair enough thing, but then how do you get to the question that I kind of presented? And this is old history. I mean, I honestly don't care at this point.
You're over it.
I'm over it. But
Would you
how do
go?
you get somebody who isn't as well known a chance to get that
Sure.
opportunity? If you're only ever going to the big names and you're only ever letting those people be the guest of honor, and you're only going with and maybe this is just my perception, but it seems to usually be only with authors that are with specific publishers, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to they're running a business. I get it. I'm a business owner myself. You have to make the best decisions that you got to make. As I said, I'm over it. I mean, right now, thanks to the pandemic, none of us
Right.
are really doing conferences unless they're online ones, but I don't really do the whole conference thing. And I've chosen to take a different approach to the whole thing in general. I mean, I write my books, I create my classes, and I connect with my community. And if, other people want to find out more about my stuff, they can visit my website. And I found a way to make that viable for me and to do what I
Sure.
want to do with it. And I will admit at the time, a few years ago, there was some ego in that. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, where I'm saying, like, a few years ago,
You've grown.
when I look at where how I've matured and kind of had some realizations. I mean, and I look at the fact that over the years, sometimes, I've been a bit controversial, or I've gotten into spats with people, and, I kind of look now and I shake my head and I'm like, yeah, you could have handled that better, dude. I could have. I mean, we all, hopefully the benefit of hindsight is that it teaches you moving forward how to be a better person. And so for me now, I kind of look at it and I'm like, would I have picked that fight 5 years ago now? No, I wouldn't. I just kind of would have been like, okay, that's just the way it is. And you take your lumps and you do what you got to do. But on the other hand, if I hadn't done that, would I have challenged myself to have approached things differently? And would I have had some of the necessary humbling experiences that I've had that have helped me become, I think, a better person as a result? So
What are the humbling experiences that you've had?
I mean, I basically ended up driving my coaching business into the ground. I ended up, because I made some mistakes there, and that was, I was trying to shortcut stuff and things just didn't really work out. I didn't really have a full grasp of what was involved. And like, in terms of even like the magical community, there was a time there where I really alienated even some people like that really liked my work. Like I had a person who had, occasionally bought some classes from me. And at one point she just wrote me and she said, I just got to be candid with you. You've really changed and I don't like the direction. I don't like who you are. I mean, I still like you as a friend. I still respect you. But the reason I unsubscribed from your email list was because of X, Y, and Z. And it really kind of brought home to me like, wow, I'm alienating some people here. And it made me really look at myself. And so, and this was like back in 2017 when this happened. And I kind of, looked over my behavior over the last few years before that. And I'm like, I've kind of bought into my own press release a bit too much. And I came to recognize that for me, one of my demons, not to be confused with a goetic demon, but one of my demons was kind of like this need for recognition and wanting to be recognized for my work. And I really sat with that. And then, I ended up, having to go back after 9 years of being self-employed and work at a customer support center. Like, let me tell you, when you're doing customer support and you're getting yelled at all day long by people who are frustrated because their software isn't working, that is a humbling experience, because any ego you have, it just gets driven away, because you're kind of like, well, here I am doing this job where I'm basically having people, take their anger and whatever else out on me. And so it just really kind of brought home to me, like, no matter what you think about yourself, at the end of the day, you're just a human being, and you're someone who's as capable of making mistakes as anyone else. And
Sure.
I think it taught me to be a bit more compassionate toward other people and toward myself, and to like really just look at things from a different perspective of like, how do I really want to show up in the world, and why am I doing what I'm doing? and why am I writing? Am I writing, you know, why am I creating classes? Am I coming at this from the right place, or am I coming at this from a place where I'm, you know, beating my chest, wanting to be recognized for what it is that, you know, I'm doing? And so I've shifted away from that. And I mean, when I do feel that occasional thing of, oh, I want to be recognized, I'm kind of like, well, where's that coming from? And usually that's coming from a place of insecurity. And so I can just let that go and release it and focus instead on, here I am, and this is what I really want to do. I want to write these books. I want to share this stuff. And, you know, hey, great if people enjoy it or whatever else. But what matters is that it has a positive impact on their lives, not whether or not they recognize me.
When you were working at the customer service call center, did a lot of people realize that you were an occult author?
No.
And not that would call in, but your coworkers?
No, not initially. I mean, I think, you know, because I started exploring self-publishing in 2018. Mm-hmm. You know, like basically, you know, so I got this job at the end of 2017, and I spent like 6 months just kind of spending some time.
No, this isn't really your life. We don't need to talk about this. What I'm more curious about is if when people were yelling at you, if they were saying like, "Hey, wizard man, how come you're not casting spells on the boss who's being so mean to you?" Like that wasn't going on.
No, that wasn't going on at all. But I mean, but being in that situation really did. I did end up doing a fair amount of practical magic to kind of work some things, and it was good. It was very helpful. I mean, I ultimately created a better work environment for myself and everything, but it also really motivated me to get out of that job as soon as possible. And I was able to do that in July 29th of this year.
So let's talk about what you're doing now and what you offer to people and how you teach and what you're teaching right now.
Okay. Right now,
books.
I write. Yeah, I'm just kind of gathering my thoughts.
You're releasing quite a lot of books at this point. You're releasing things in fairly quick succession. So, one of the things that people have trouble with my work is they don't know exactly, because I've written a lot of different stuff too. And like, where do you enter into your work? What's the entry space for you to understand, you know, the Taylor Ellwood experience?
I would recommend starting with the How Magic Works series, which starts with my book, The Process of Magic, and has 6 books in the series. And then if you are interested in my more experimental work, depending on if you're interested in like integrating pop culture into magic or space-time magic or working with the body, you could check out the Inner Alchemy series or the Space-Time Magic series or the Pop Culture Magic series. And then I also have a couple of books that I've written on how to work with spirits. That's a new series that I'm working on right now. And I'm going to be continuing some of the other stuff, like the Inner Alchemical series. The next nonfiction book I'm going to be writing is going to be the Inner Alchemy of Emotions. And then
how Magic Works is where people start. So I want to stop you there for just 1 second and say, what, you know, in a nutshell, I know you've written a whole series about it apparently, but how do you feel, what do you feel the way magic works is? What is the process for you?
Well, when I talk about the process of magic, I'm talking about taking an analytical perspective to your magical work and being able to take apart like a magical working and then put it back together again by personalizing it, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. So really what I'm doing is I'm looking at like, what are the fundamental principles of how magic works? Why does magic work, as opposed to just...
Why does it work?
Well, when I look at it, I think of it in terms of why it works. Part of it boils down to defining the result that you want. And then from there, creating a process and figuring out which specific principles you're going to work with. You know, for example, like the principle of connection. What am I connecting with? Am I connecting with the spirit? Am I connecting with something else? And how am I going to bring that in? And then principle of change, for example, what am I changing about myself? What am I changing about my environment? What else is being changed? You know, things along those lines. So we're really kind of looking at this holistic place of, okay, I want to get a result. Well, what is happening as a result of you doing magic to get that result? What's changing? And so that's essentially what the focus of that is.
And so beyond these works, you mentioned that you also write fiction, or you sort of didn't mention it, but you said it, you implied it.
Yes.
What sort of fiction?
I write, well, right now I have a zombie apocalypse series that I'm trying to wrap up. And I also have written a superhero trilogy. And then I'll figure out what my next thing is. And then I also actually write books on self-publishing as well. So.
Oh, interesting. So your fiction, is it based on, magical principles, or is it just sort of just your imagination?
Nope. It's just me having some fun. I mean, the zombie apocalypse it's the zombie apocalypse call center. So it's all about these call center workers that have to that help people through. Yeah, I wonder where I got that from, right?
So are there people you work with who figure in as characters a little bit, or? No.
Oh yeah, a bit. I mean, the characters are modeled off of that, and also modeled off of customer interactions. So it gets pretty hilarious. It's a bit of a satire in a way.
Okay, and is there humor in all those things, or no?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I try to make my fiction in general has a bit of a comedic take on it. I like to have fun, like even like with the superhero fiction, same kind of thing. It's about a superhero that should be able to fly but doesn't know how to and needs to take lessons, as an example.
Okay. So going back to Magick for a second, you also mentioned that you teach courses. You have a system that you teach, or is it just sort of piecemeal, this and that, or how does that work?
So I have I do have like an online courses. They're video courses that you can take at any time if you want to, and I have a it's not there's a bit of a system there, but I mean, some of it's basically just featuring stuff that I've taught. Like I have like an ultimate sigil magic course, I have a creating magical entities course, and then I have my process of magic and principles of magic. It's really just based on what interests me. Right now I'm creating a course on long-term magic where I'm talking about life design and magic, and how to apply magic toward designing your life. Like where are you going to be 50 years from now, and how can you use magic to help you achieve that particular perspective and work. And at the same time recognizing, like, if I'm doing magic to get a result for like where I'm going to be X many years, I'm still starting on it today. I'm starting to change my life today.
Mm-hmm. And how does that connect with sort of the more the energy work and stuff that I'm familiar with from your inner alchemy work? Like how does that integrate with some of these other things that you're talking about?
Well, like I have a course, for example, on called Inner Alchemy of Life, which
Mm-hmm.
is on like working with the neurotransmitters and introduces and the bacteria of the body. So it introduces you to my system there. I have a course, a couple courses on meditation and internal work. So there's definitely some stuff that focuses on that as well.
So it sounds like you're going to have to send me a bunch of links for people to be able to find all this stuff, because it seems like you've got a pretty wide network of different things going on. Is that correct?
I can just send you a link to the class, the school page, and it has all the courses listed on there. So it's pretty easy, and then you can just check them out and see.
Then you've got books and fiction and nonfiction books. You've got stuff on how to self-publish. So you've got a wide range of things that people might want to take a look at. It's terrific.
Yeah, so, I have lots of interests. What can I say?
So, okay, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of just give your final spiel on yourself and what you're doing and what you would like to share with other people as a result of that.
So, Taylor Ellwood again. You can check out my site at magicalexperiments.com if you want to learn more about the magic stuff. And really what I'm doing is I am just exploring how magic works and exploring why it works and experimenting and seeing where things can go. And I'm concerned with the evolution of magic. And, at the same time, really, I'm just kind of doing my own thing. And I mean, I think it's great that people are doing whatever it is they're doing out there. I'm just doing my own thing. And if my work appeals to you, you're more than welcome to come check it out and hang out with me.